So without further ado, I will turn it over to Michael Brown of Brown Broadcast Services. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. Get to the beginning. There he is. Great. It's all you.
All right. Are we screen sharing? Can you see that?
I can. Can everybody else?
Okay, great. All right. So we did decide to take questions along the way. Okay, that would be fine.
Just
this is a
whenever you
lot.
want to stop and take questions, Michael, just they'll wait for your cue, I guess.
Okay.
But it's totally up to you, really, however you want to do it.
All right. The windows are coming. The windows are coming. I'm going to talk about specifically the full power, non-commercial educational, NCE, and LPFM filing windows. We're also anticipating at some point in the next couple of years a translator filing window. I wasn't going to give you any details on that, but if you had some questions on that, we could talk about that briefly also. I'm going to talk about who can apply, basic interference requirements. Is there any spectrum left? That's the elephant in the room. Expanding your existing NCE group or transitioning from LPFM to full power. A moderate detail on the point system and some discussion of the new rules that have changed, and then some strategies for success and Q&A. I think, like Sharon said, maybe I'll break about 3 times for questions so far. All the indications we hear is that there should be an NCE window sometime next year. We just don't know when. Actually, the change in administration might slightly delay that because we're not going to have a full complement of commissioners right off the bat. But sometime next year, I don't see it happening before the second quarter, and more likely than not, maybe it would be happening in the third or fourth quarter, but we just don't know. What we've been told is that the next thing that would happen would be an LPFM window, followed finally by a translator window, either next year or the year after that. There's a lot of interest, in particular, in an open translator window. There has not been a window for new translators open to all applicants since 2003. So we're looking at almost a generation ago. The windows we expect will be announced at least 30 days before they open. Back in 2007, the last time we had a reserved band NCE window, we had an announcement 6 months in advance. I'm not so sure that's going to happen this time. Typically, all non-window applications for minor changes for existing stations are frozen 30 days before a window in all ranges of frequencies that might have an effect on them. Now, if you have an existing full power station in particular, and you've been thinking about doing an upgrade or a power increase, I suggest you try to get going on that right away, get it done ahead of the window. The window itself could last just 5 weekdays, or there have been some that went over a weekend, going for a total of 9 or 10 days. The hard and fast rule: no early filing and no late filing. When that window closes, it's done, and there will be no viewing of the other applications until the window is closed. Most errors cannot be fixed once the window is closed. And any amendments you might file after the window closes can only degrade, they can never enhance your competitive position. As far as who's eligible, any state registered nonprofit entity. There are some states still that recognize unincorporated nonprofit entities. I've seen documents sort of straddling both sides of this, of whether that's acceptable to the FCC. My view on it is, if you have an unincorporated informal, so-called informal nonprofit entity, get registered and incorporated with the state. So there's no question as to your eligibility. The FCC in general defers to the various states as far as what constitutes a bona fide nonprofit in their state. State recognized educational institutions are eligible to be applicants, as are religious organizations, congregations, tribal entities, tribal governments. As it stands at the moment, 75% or more of your board must be U.S. citizens. There have been a lot of exceptions to this in the last 4 years. I don't really know what the future is going to be on that. The low power FM by definition must be local. They have to have a local board, 75% of the board, or the organization headquarters must be within 10 or 20 miles of the transmitter site, 10 miles if you're in a top 50 urban area. And so with LPFM, the transmitter site is the nexus. With non-commercial, the community of license is the nexus. Non-commercial educational full power applicants do not have to be local. You can apply anywhere in the country, but it does help quite a bit with the points if you are local. So any questions up till now? I guess we're just talking basics so far. All right. For low power FM, there's something called a public safety low power FM, not often used. Their programming is limited to a public safety in nature, but they have no limits as to the number of LPFMs they can apply for or be granted. All others have limits. The tribal entities can own 2 LPFM stations and 4 translators or boosters, and everyone else, all the rest of us, just 1 LPFM plus up to 2 translators or boosters. Other than the above, no attributable interest in any other broadcast stations or daily papers or cable TV entities. There are some limited exceptions, however, which I'm not going to go into here. Now, if your organization is a local chapter that's part of a national organization, and if you have a local board, you must be insulated from the attributable interests of the national organization, and then you can apply as a local group. For non-commercial station, NCE stations, there are no numerical limits as the total number of stations you can own, but we do anticipate, in fact, we're pretty certain there will be a limit as to the number of applications you can file in this particular window. The commission issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. There were comments already received on that. They suggested a limit of 10. I expect it's probably going to be 10 is the limit. A new wrinkle is that the applicant must submit contact information for their tower site's reasonable assurance. You should have this in writing from the tower owner or manager, and I suggest it be in the form of a signed letter with their physical signature, not just in email, and don't rely on verbal reasonable assurances. And I'll give an example of why that's a very bad idea in a moment. Interference requirements. NCE stations anywhere from 100 watts equivalent at 30 meters to 100,000 watts. There actually are full power stations that are only 8 or 10 watts if they are high enough. Coverage anywhere from 3.5 to 57 miles in radius on average. This is to the FCC 60 dBU coverage contour. The applicants must show a lack of interference caused and interference received to stations on their channel, co-channel, and also the first, second, and third adjacent channels. That's 200, 400, 600 kilohertz above and below you. The protection is mostly demonstrated by a lack of protecting and interfering contours. It's basically a big jigsaw puzzle, if you will. In fact, the last slide kind of showed that jigsaw puzzle. In this particular case, the software I'm using here color codes the various kinds of contours, and like color contours cannot overlap each other. You have free use of directional antennas with full power NCE, and that can help you shoehorn in the station. The minimum kilometrage spacings are also required to an intermediate frequency station, and I'm not going to go into that too much, but stations that are 10.6 or 10.8 megahertz above you also have to be protected. And there still is a legacy protection to television channel 6 stations. We expected this to be sunsetted as of July of this year. Last I've read, this sunsetting has been put on hold, so we don't know for sure if we'll still have to deal with that. And that sometimes can be a real limiting factor. NCE channel finders, if you find them, are mostly useless. You really need a good engineer to determine whether there's going to be a channel available. More often than not, you're not going to be able to just say, I want to put the transmitter here and be lucky enough to get it at your first choice of locations. With LPFM, those are limited to 100 watts equivalent at 98 meters, which corresponds to an average coverage of about 3.5 miles. If the terrain is great, good line of sight, your real world coverage might be much better than that. If you've got incoming interference from a full power station, your coverage could be much worse than that. LPFM applicants also need to show a lack of interference caused to co-channel first and also second adjacent stations using a spacing matrix, which I'll show in just a moment. But alternately, in fact, most LPFM stations on the air now have shown their second adjacent protection by a lack of the signal strength interference to populated areas. So if it doesn't pass the spacing matrix, you can still try to see whether the interfering contour that you're creating towards the second adjacent station, which is pretty small contour, if it's above people's heads or doesn't reach any populated areas by separation, then you can use that so-called second adjacent waiver to show the lack of interference. It's basically some three-dimensional trigonometry. That's how it's done. Low power FMs are not protected from incoming interference from full power stations, and this can be a serious problem. Channel finders can be useful, but I wouldn't rely on them for your final determination, at least with the FCC's provided channel finders, and I'm not sure whether they're going to do that again or not. We found several instances where, in particular, where they gave us a false negative, occasionally a false positive, but a lot of false negatives. So use the channel finder as a starting point, but don't give up if it says you have nothing. Yeah, here's an indication. Can you guys see this mouse I'm moving around, the mouse pointer?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not hearing anything, but
Yes,
you
we
can
see it.
Yeah, we see it.
all still there. Okay. Well, it shows here second and third adjacent channel minimum separation. The reality is, other than for third adjacent stations that are carrying the Talking Books subcarrier, I'm going into minutia. I'll just stop right there. For most purposes, low power FMs only have to show first and second adjacent channel interference protection, and the second, as I said, can usually be done with that so-called waiver. So it's really this main part of that. So just for example, if it's a Class A full power and you're first adjacent to them, you need to be 92 kilometers away from them. By the way, on any of these, where am I? I lost my way. Let's go back. I've got, that's what I get for rolling the mouse instead of using arrow keys. Now you've seen all of them. Okay, here we go. The spacings can be rounded to the nearest kilometer, so you really only need, you know, a half a kilometer less than what you see on the chart here. Is there any spectrum left? That's what we should have started with. Well, if you're in an area with 100,000 people or more, in most cases, all the channels for full power are long gone. There are a few exceptions, and we're pretty good at finding workable rim shots that are shooting from 30 to 50 miles away that have worked pretty well in some cases. And that may be all that you're going to find in the area you may be interested in. If you're outside of areas of 100,000 people, you may actually find some channels. Also, there were a moderate number of construction permits that were granted in 2007, and even one or two in 2010 that were never built. And those are channels that could be applied for, although the 2010 was not for reserve band. So a quick example with St. George, Utah, we did an application for that applicant who was an LPFM, and 35,000 watt powerhouse station that would cover most of the area between Salt Lake City and Las Vegas. It was just too much, and then of course the economy crashed in 2008, and it never got built. But anybody interested in St. George, I think it's still there. With LPFM, LPFMs can go in a lot more places than full power NCE. The pickings are still pretty slim in urban areas, but if you're looking and you don't find any available channels, we've had pretty good luck in looking at mining for silent stations, either silent LPFMs or even silent translators. In many cases, these stations just turn off the switch, never tell the FCC anything, and until they go through a renewal cycle, they might still be listed as being licensed years after they signed off the air. And if you can find these, we've had pretty good luck when we made contact with such dead stations in getting them to voluntarily dismiss their long gone license and opening up that channel. So if you already have an NCE station, this is a great chance to add satellite stations, and it's less hassle than ever. There's no main studio requirement anyway right now. That's been done away with. So there's no need to obtain a main studio waiver. So you could get a full power station and basically run it like a translator. It'll still need a public file, but other than that, there's very little hassle involved. And what we found is that the rural listeners, while less numerous, can be very loyal supporters. And if the costs are kept down, you might only need a handful of regular supporters to make it pay for itself. They have fewer choices in general and fewer distractions. If you're an LPFM looking to transition to an NCE, you can apply. If you include a properly worded divestiture pledge prepared by your attorney, you can continue to operate your LPFM up to the moment that the NCE begins regular operations and have a smooth transition. And we've been involved in a number of LPFM stations that made the transition to full power. Okay, any questions up to now? I'm going really fast, so hope I'm not spinning too many heads. Anything? All right. Are we still here?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Just
Yep.
I guess-
Silence is good.
I did have a
okay.
question.
Silence is good. All right.
If that's okay.
On the chat too, Michael.
Huh?
There is a question on the chat,
Okay. Let's see how I get to that.
bottom of your screen.
Okay. Well,
I could read it.
I'm in a full
that
screen mode, so let's see how I get to that.
Michael, it's Sandra. Sandra's asking.
Yeah, I can
Go ahead.
state
Yeah,
it.
go ahead.
Just when you said that LPFMs are not protected from new full power, I was just wondering, do you expect that to be a widespread problem for LPFMs to get kind of overrun by new incoming full power stations?
Yeah, it's already a problem, and it's a double-edged sword because they're not protected from incoming interference. They're able to be shoved into places where, if they had to protect it both ways, it wouldn't fit. And so you pick your poison, I guess. Translators are the same way. And if you have more than one channel to choose from, a careful analysis should be done as to how much incoming interference you're going to get. And we can do such analysis, real world signal strength analysis predictions. But yeah, it's already a problem. I would say at least 1/3 of the LPFMs out there complain all the time about the incoming interference. And there's not a lot we can do about that other than trying to see if there's a cleaner channel available that they can move to. Fortunately, the commission is now allowing LPFMs to move to cleaner channels pretty easily. If you show that another channel will have reduced interference caused or received, they will generally let you move to that cleaner channel. But it's an issue.
Actually, just wanted to clarify one other thing. You said that I know that LPFMs can only basically own one license. Did you say that for full power FM, a nonprofit organization can be granted licenses for multiple stations in multiple cities?
Yeah, unlimited number. There's no limit.
Okay.
The only limit will be how many you can apply for in this particular window. If you've got 50 already, you could get 10 more.
Cool.
And then you've got educational media who has about 1,000 signals, translators, and full powers, and they're looking at getting as many more as they can. They've got more signals than Clear Channel, or the company formerly known as Clear Channel, iHeartMedia. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Yeah, I had a question related to Sandra's first question. Are we just talking about the reserved band down on the left-hand side of the dial as far as LPFMs getting kicked off by these new larger non-com stations?
Well,
the whole band.
Yeah, I've been jumping back and forth. LPFMs can be anywhere on the band. There's very few of them that are in the non-com band, just because the non-com band is pretty saturated. But they can be anywhere on the band. This window for NCE will just be for the reserve band frequencies. So there aren't all that many cases where there's a conflict between an LPFM and an NCE. There are a few, but not many.
Michael, I had a question as well, if there's time.
Yes?
Can you hear me? Okay. Yep. Clark
Yes.
and Butte here. I guess I was just hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on that process of divesting of the LPFM as you take on a full power non-commercial educational station. In that transition, is it typical that you can retain call letters?
Yes. Actually, Michael Cousins, if you're there, you could talk about that. We did that in Spokane, Washington. They had the same call letters and just dropped the LP
Okay.
suffix.
That's no problem. You can specify call letters that are contingent on a new station coming on or on an assignment being completed. So yeah, there's a lot of flexibility in carrying call signs over.
Okay, thanks for that. And my other and final question was, say we're able to attain licenses in multiple cities, the signal can be brought to those new locations over the internet. Is that acceptable, or does that have to be some other means?
Yeah, with full power stations, you can use any means to get it there. You might be thinking about translators that are not fill-in that have to receive through the air. There's none of that with full power stations. You can get the signal there any way you want, and internet is just fine if you got a solid enough connection.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. So after the window closes, once again, I'm jumping back and forth to between NCE and LPFM, but I'm hoping I'm keeping it clear as at the head of the page. After the NCE window closes, if the past procedures are followed again, the FCC will open an initial settlement window even before they announce who's mutually exclusive and who isn't. When I say mutually exclusive, these are, applicants that are somehow overlapping or conflicting with each other, and they can't all be granted. However, your engineer should be able to predetermine what your MX group looks like and who's in it. And these MX groups can form long daisy chains, kind of like the Olympic rings effect, if you will. In Hawaii, Mike Cousins, how many did we have in Hawaii? 54, was it? I can't recall now. It was some unbelievable number.
I think it was 54. It was a tremendous number in one group.
Yeah, and it literally wound itself across the Hawaiian Islands from one end of the Hawaiian island chain to the other end and then back again. It was crazy. MX applicants are allowed to submit unilateral technical solutions. If you've got a way to get out of everybody else's, to uncouple yourself from all the other applicants, you're free to do that, and the FCC will love you for it. So if that means moving your transmitter site or doing a directional antenna or reducing the power or whatever, as long as you can still cover the community license you chose, which you cannot readily change. And so you're pretty much free to do anything else that will get you out of the MX group. Voluntary timeshare agreements and settlements with other applicants can start to be put together at this time, even before the MX groups are announced. You can pay off those who agree to withdraw their application, but the payoffs are limited to the reasonable and prudent expenses incurred in their filing. Typically, that's going to be less than $10,000. So if the numbers are in that range, below that, I haven't seen any evidence in my experience that anybody will question it. Eventually, the FCC will announce whatever MX groups remain at that point, and settlements and solutions will continue to be accepted for a while. The FCC loves for you to solve the MX yourself, and they'll give you a pretty long period of time to do that. Eventually, if no settlements or solutions are offered and there's still competing applications, the FCC will begin judging the applicants on the point system, and only one applicant per MX group will be granted. Threshold determinations. So before they actually go to the point systems, there are a handful of so-called threshold determinations that if these are met, then the clock is stopped right there and we've got a winner. The first one is tribal applicants move to the head of the line under the latest rules. If they meet a convoluted set of requirements, they have to meet all those requirements. They trump everything else. Next in line is whether an applicant is providing superior service to underserved areas. Specifically, if they provide the first non-commercial service to a significant population. Significant is defined as over 2,000 people and at least 10% of your total coverage population. And this, by the way, is based on population centroids in whatever the latest available census is. And we may not have the 2020 census ready to go by the time we have this window, so we might still be using 2010. And if an applicant provides a significantly better first service population coverage than the next closest competitor, and that's defined as having 5,000 more than the next best competitor, they can win outright. If there's no winner decided, it moves on to aggregating together the first and second NCE service put together. By the way, this is defined as the full power stations only and 60 dBu or 1 millivolt per meter contour. And so you may in your area have, let's say, an NPR station that comes in just fine on your car radio, but you might actually be outside their 60 dBu FCC contour, and therefore, for FCC purposes, you have no non-commercial service. And there's no distinction made between secular and religious broadcasting. And it has to be an NCE full power NCE station on a reserved frequency. Most of those are in the reserve band, but there are a few dozen that are actually in the non-reserve band. These are non-reserve band frequencies that are in perpetuity reserved for exclusive non-commercial use. Those also count. The K-Love stations that are on a commercial channel that tomorrow could be sold to a classic rock commercial operator, those don't count. So it's kind of a complicated thing, and we build some maps. I wish I had included a sample of what that looks like. But if you can show significantly better service to these underserved areas, you can win without going on to the point system. But if there is no winner, we do proceed to the point system, which for the most part is the same as it was way back in 2007. 7 total possible points, 3 points for an established local applicant, defined as having been established for at least 2 years, having a headquarters or 3/4 of the board within 25 miles of the community of license. The community of license is the nexus in this case. If it's a government entity, they're considered local throughout their jurisdiction. If it's state government, the whole state is local. Diversity of ownership. If there is no 70 dBu, this is 70 dBu overlap with any other interests that your group has, then you can get these points. Now, new for this window, you can have divestiture pledges. So you can, for example, say, I've got this kind of semi-crappy non-com station, and I'm proposing to have a new one on a different frequency that'll cover much better, and I'm willing to just give up the old one if I get the new one. You can have a divestiture pledge in there to do that and still get the 2 points. So divestiture pledges, more than ever in this window, can preserve points where they previously might not have been able to. Technical superiority, if you can show a much greater population and area than the next best applicant, you can get 1 or 2 points, depending how much better you are than everybody else. After the window closes, the points cannot be increased or fixed in any way. They can only be degraded. So it's important to get it right the first time. Finally, tiebreakers, and there's a new one that's been added. Fewest other stations or construction permits, fewest pending applications in this window, and finally, stations that applied for a full power NCE station, and I believe this is both the 2007 and 2010 windows, right, Mike? But they lost on points or tiebreakers, can
Right.
claim this very last tiebreaker. However, with the caveat that the applicant that organization must have been in continuous existence since that time. And if they're still tied and no voluntary settlement or voluntary timeshare is submitted, a timeshare ultimately will be imposed to the 3 oldest applicants. Exhale. Any questions? There'll be a test later.
Michael, how many of those three-way timeshares do you predict there will be in the next window? That just seems crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. I think it'll be a pretty small percentage. It'll probably only be a handful.
Yeah, gosh, I hope so.
Yeah. There are a number of timeshares in the country, but as a percentage of total stations, for full power, that is, there's much more timeshares with low power.
Yeah, right.
But the number of full power timeshares is pretty small. It's probably only a few dozen in the whole country. New rules. More new rules. An applicant which prevailed on the first and second service can change or move their facility and lose some of the coverage as long as you offset it by coverage gains elsewhere. So if you provided first service to 50 people over here and you just have to move your tower and there's no way you can ever cover them, as long as you can make up some first service people at the other end of the coverage, the commission will now let you do that. This is a new rule. In Walla, California, on the Northern California coast, most of you know who Peggy Berryhill is. We lost our tower site after the CP was granted, and we had to scramble, build a new site, and we just barely made it work. We were sweating bullets there for a while, but under the new rules, we wouldn't have been sweating. Another thing that kind of caught up to a few people is changes in the board. Board changes of more than 50% while the application is still pending are no longer fatal to the application. As it turns out, the FCC had been habitually waiving these, but a religious broadcaster competitor in Chehalis, Washington, called KBOO on the carpet on an application that I prepared for them in Chehalis. And after several rounds of wrangling and a lot of legal expenses, KBOO ended up losing the station because their board had changed more than 50% in the several years that had transpired. Well, we no longer have to worry about that. This is a rule change that long overdue. But still, I would tend to caution groups about trying to keep your board as stable as you can during the pending of your application. It just doesn't look good, if 80% of them walk out over some dispute. So do you have any comments on that, Mike? Or all right.
Agreed. you want to vet your board carefully at the beginning and then hope they stick with you.
Yeah. LPFM point system is a little bit simpler. If you promise to provide 8 hours of local daily programming, you get a point. If you promise to have a publicly accessible, locally located main studio, isn't it ironic that LPFMs will be the only stations with main studios anymore? But you can get a point for that pledge. If you pledge both of those, you get a third point. Pretty much every applicant we work with immediately goes for those first 3 points. If you don't, you're not likely to get the station if you have any competition. You can also get a point if your group has been locally established for at least 2 years. If you have no attributable interest in any other broadcast station, like we had one group that they owned a translator before they went for an LPFM. So it would be best to not have that attributable interest if you want to get the point. And tribal applicants are the only kind that can actually get 6 points. So once again, a tribal applicant with the proper qualifications can run the table. There are no LPFM tiebreakers. 2 or 3 applicants that are tied with the most points can enter into a point sharing aggregation agreement. So if you all have 5, you can aggregate 3 groups together and have 15 points as an aggregation in an attempt to beat out other applicants or aggregations. I think they're in San Francisco. There was one case where there were actually 2 aggregated point groups fighting it out. Technical solutions, including voluntary settlements, payoffs, timeshares, can be proposed very much like NCE. And ultimately, if there's no winner and no voluntary settlement, the FCC will impose a non-renewable concurrent timeshare to the 3 oldest applicants, the ones that have been around continuously the longest. And my understanding is that even after that happens, you could still convert it to a voluntary timeshare. Otherwise, when the license runs out, nobody will have a station.
Yeah, correct.
Holding periods. For NCE, for the first 4 years of continuous operation, and by the way, if you have a silent STA, that stops the clock on the 4 years. Has to be 4 years of continuous operation other than, brief outages because the power went out for a few hours. That doesn't count. For a station that won on points, the station can be transferred during that 4-year period only to another entity that could garner the same or greater number of points that you did. For those that won on first or second non-commercial service, they have to maintain that service, but they have some more flexibility than they used to, as I talked about a few pages ago. With low power FM, the rules have now changed, and they've evolved quite a bit over the years. Initially, low power FMs could never be transferred, and then there was some waivers to transfer some of them, and then they had a 3-year holding period. Now, the only set in stone holding period is you have for the first 18 months of your construction permit. And by the way, all these construction permits are now for a full 3 years. You cannot transfer the low power FM for the first 18 months that the construction permit is sitting there. For 4 years of operation, very much like the full power NCE, you can transfer it to another entity, but only for another entity that would possess at least as many points. So these are attempts to try to prevent trafficking or shill applicants. I guess it helps. It's not totally foolproof in that, but it is minimized that factor. Okay, strategies. Think big and avoid mistakes. Are any other questions in that last segment before this is the last part here.
This is Sandra. Yeah, I did. Just a couple of things on the point system. When it says diversity of ownership, that just means that you don't own another station, right? Or you own less than the other guy.
You can get the diversity of ownership points if you have no other stations or no attributable interests, and that could include, overlapping board members of two different entities.
Right.
No stations that overlap their 70 dBu contours with each other. You can get the point. You may not get the tiebreaker, but you can get the point as long as all your other stations don't overlap with your new proposed station.
Okay, cool. And then on the LPFM transfer, I had understood that for existing LPFMs that you could freely transfer the license to another nonprofit after 3 years of operation. Is that wrong?
Well, that's the old rule. Now you don't have to wait 3 years. If the new nonprofit could get the same or greater number of points, you can do it after the 18 months.
Correct.
So
But for existing LPFMs, after 3 years,
the
you can.
18-month clock starts at the moment the original construction permit is issued, and whether the station is built right away or built much, 3 years later, it's only that 18-month period that you can't transfer at all. I believe that's correct. So for an existing LPFM, has it been around for? Well, is your transferee, could they qualify for at least as many points? If not, you're going to have to.
I don't know about that.
Well, if not, then you're going to have to wait for 4 years of operation.
Even with an existing.
Yeah. Well, if the entity that's going to be the new owner could not garner the same. Well, this is also for what was your station originally won on points. If it was not won on points, then you can ignore that last sentence.
Okay. I'm actually working with a couple of stations, and one was won on points and one was not. And just looking at now with the full power options, whether to move, try to move to full power, let go of the low power. So that's why I'm asking.
Well, fortunately, these windows will be, the full power window will be first, so you could try that and see what happens, and then if not, work another strategy after that's over. And usually they're going to try to get the bulk of a one window cleared out of the way before they open another window, just so that the available frequencies are a little bit clearer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a question. If we're a low power at this point, if we want to expand territory, are we trying to get more LPFMs or are we trying to get an NCE?
Well, if you're a low power and you're not a tribe or a public safety thing, then you're limited to one per organization.
Okay, so how does a LPFM expand? I guess is the question. Is the first option going for an NCE?
Well, sure.
If there's a frequency available in the area, you absolutely should go for that. In addition to probably covering a much bigger area, it's got a lot more security in the future. You're protected from incoming interference. You're not going to get bumped around the dial. You have a lot more permanence with full power. So whenever you can upgrade to a full power, you should do it. It's just if you're in a big area, you probably won't be able to.
Right, we're in a rural area where there isn't much competition. So I don't really know how much competition there really is out there. What kind of costs are involved?
Well, to apply, there's no filing fee. You'll want an attorney and an engineer, and those costs are probably going to be somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 for the two of them for a basic application. without a huge amount of complication. If you have competition and you have to negotiate settlements, then that's just going to, whatever time it takes to do that. And also, if there are petitions to deny filed against you, your costs after the window closes could be zero or could be, many thousands of dollars. So you just don't know.
If one were to stay as an LPFM and get some translators, would that achieve more or less the same ability to be heard further?
Well, translators are usually a somewhat small coverage area. If you're east of the Mississippi, it's pretty small. It's a little bit smaller than your LPFM. If you're west of the Mississippi, it's somewhat larger, but it's still, in general, it's not going to cover as much as the full power. But yes, we're working with several LPFMs that have one or more translators, or even a couple of boosters, and we've seen situations where the translator covered far more people than the original LPFM did. The translators probably have the most flexibility of where they can locate. They're the easiest to shoehorn in tight places. So
can an LPFM have an unlimited number of translators?
No, unless you're a tribe, you can only have 2.
Okay.
And the only requirement is that a bit of the 60 dBu coverage contour of the translator needs to bump up against your low power FM contour. So you're not going to cover an area that's 30 miles away from you. It's, it might double or triple your coverage in a contiguous area, but it's going to it has to be, like I said, it has to bump up against you.
And what
you could have 2 of those. So, between 3 signals, you might quadruple your current coverage.
In terms of expense, how much for a translator?
Probably similar to what you spend on the LPFM. It's very much the same equipment, the similar power levels. With the translator at low elevations, you could have as much as 250 watts, but as soon as you get any kind of elevation, that drops pretty quickly, very much like LPFM.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Michael, is that waiting until after the 2 non-commercial windows before we can apply for a translator?
Yeah, the last we heard, and if anybody's heard different, please let me know, is that the translator window will be last. There's going to be probably a lot more competition for the translator window because we got all these commercial stations and maybe even some remaining AM stations that didn't get it for the last round of windows. They're probably going to be clamoring for what's left there. And by the way, if you apply for the translator as a nonprofit entity and there are any for-profit competition, you lose out on going to the auction, because with the translators, ultimately those that are not solved by some other means go to auction to the highest bidder. As a practical matter, the last time we had a window, the only time we had a filing window for translators that everybody could apply for was in 2003, and there were how many? 14,000 applications, Mike, something like that.
Yeah.
And we ended up with a couple of dozen went to auction. It was just very, very few.
Took them 8 years to get out from under the avalanche.
Yeah.
Michael, why don't you switch off the share screen so we can see everybody?
Okay. Well, I'm almost done.
Oh, you're not done. Oh.
Well, I'm almost done.
Okay.
Almost, but it's if there's a couple more questions now, I'll stop sharing. But if we're done with questions for the moment, I'll just finish this up.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Yeah, so just to complete that thought, for your translator application, it probably makes more sense to apply as an individual or a separate company. For the translators that we've obtained for low power FM stations that were in the 03 window, they just had some friends of the station who weren't even board members who applied in their name. You can file as an individual, as a so-called commercial applicant. And so, well, back to the case in Spokane, Washington, we obtained 2 translators for them. They actually ended up selling one of them, as I recall, and kept the other one, and that's been very useful to them. And now they're a full power station. Okay, well, just to finish this up, think big and avoid mistakes. If you want to get an NCE station, it really helps if you're a local applicant, established for 2 years, you propose serving underserved areas if possible. You have no other stations, or at least no other overlapping stations, and propose as large a facility as is possible or practical. That will massively increase your chances of prevailing. If there's any competition at all, if you don't have all those attributes, you're probably not going to get it. Now, on the other hand, you probably should be sure that it's practical to build what you're proposing. And there were several NCE applicants, particularly out here in the western states. I can think of places in particular in Utah and Arizona where they filed for big facilities, and I did one of those, and they never got built. Well, in one case, you know, the 2008 crash hit, and that was all she wrote. And unfortunately, second place winners have no recourse. They can't go back. They're long since wiped off the map for being in the running. So, you know, propose the biggest, baddest thing you can, but be pretty sure that if you do get it, you could actually build it. Otherwise, it's not much use. If you're an LPFM, just get all the points you can. And so, for LPFM or NCE, we suggest use a good engineer, use a good attorney. Very few things are fixable after filing. Make sure the board is everything you say it is. Get a written and hand-signed reasonable assurance letter, even though that's not specifically required. I certainly suggest you do that. We had a specific instance in Salem, Oregon, that there was the guy, I think he was about 82 years old at the time. He's now gone, but he signed an affidavit on behalf of a competing applicant saying that he did not give us reasonable assurance. We whipped out the letter signed by him saying, yes, you did. You just don't remember you did. And we saved the station. Had we not had that signed letter, we would have lost the station. And just finally, assume that you're going to be challenged on everything in your application by a nasty, aggressive, conniving competitors. And assume that, and you won't be disappointed. The applicant, most cases, you aren't facing a petition to deny, but it happens. And it can be frustrating and expensive. Even if you win, it can still be frustrating and expensive. So don't give them any ammunition. And finally, there's a number of organizations that already have some things posted. My cousins who's on with us up here, of course, just finished a new pointers on the point system. And I don't know if it's posted anywhere yet, Mike, but
we'll get it circulated. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a website. I've got a website. Betty's got a website for CMAP. We'll get that posted on all those places. I
wanted to add one thing about settlements. Could I say that?
Yeah.
Okay. When the first thing that happens after a window has closed is that the staff issues a list of the applications in MX groups, okay? And these groups may be, well, if you're free and clear in a singleton, you'll be granted. If not, you're going into one of these groups. Much, much later, they issue a decision where they go through the point system bona fides of each and every applicant and determine a tentative selectee. And
Right.
this document, which is very laborious, tremendous amount of staff work, has to be acted on by the full commission, which also can impose some delays. And then at long last, you've got a tentative selectee ordained in this document. Well, no, you're not done yet, because there's an opportunity for petitions to deny, and the petitions involve not only shooting down the front runner, but explaining why all of the runners up should be in a higher position. That leads to another stage of reconsideration and staff work to make subsequent decisions. The big point I'm making is that if you can possibly settle before or after that initial list of MX groups, you have shaved off 2.5, possibly 3 years of hand-to-hand combat getting to a final decision, including the possibility that you would in the end lose the case. So the importance of settlement early, when you know that list is coming out or when you see where you stand on that list, I can't exaggerate enough the importance of that stage.
Yeah, I agree completely. I went back in the 07 windows, Mike, and at least in 07 for full power, they actually opened it up for settlements before they even published an official MX list. I don't recall whether they did that with the LPFMs or not. I didn't check. But they started letting you do settlements very early based on your own determination of what the MX groups looked like. So, and they're going to give you a pretty long time to do a settlement. So yes, do a settlement if you possibly can. It's a whole lot less painful. So
I can personally speak to that. We were in an MX group. We were at the tail end of an MX group in Wisconsin in the 2007 window, and I was convinced that our competitor had no chance of winning their license, because we were at the end of a chain. We were like the very end of the chain, and he was the station that we were competing with had all these other stations on the other side of them geographically. And we just approached them and we said, look, we'll pay for your engineering fees if you drop out, because there's no way you're going to win. And they saw that. I don't know if they knew that before we approached them, but they certainly did after we did, and they accepted it and we settled. And I think, as Michael Cousins said, that the application more or less breezed through after that.
yeah. So
It never hurts. It never hurts to ask.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The frustrating things with some applicants is they don't really know why they don't want to settle, but they're not ready to do it. And in some cases, they may not have savvy engineers, or they don't want to pay for a savvy engineer. So in a handful of cases, we've actually done their engineering work for them to show them either a way that they could get out of our way, or why there's no way they ever could win. Because they weren't willing to spend for their consultants to do that work. So it's a lot of push and shove, but ultimately it gets settled. Okay, I'm gonna unshare so I can see you all. Okay.
Okay. Great job tonight, Mike. That's very good.
I hope that wasn't too much.
No, it wasn't too much. It was very,
Yeah, not for me. It was
it
helpful.
was the right balance, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey there. I had a couple of questions to bring up. There was a situation regarding reasonable assurance in the past. It was one I was involved with that I got assurance from a municipal law enforcement agency. Somebody inside said, sure, you're allowed to use reasonable assurance. We moved the applicant. Now, this is not on the first application. This was a subsequent modification to try to help resolve one step involved resolving the MX group. After that applicant was granted, somebody came after the fact and tried to make a lot of fuss that they spoke to somebody else in the municipal law enforcement department who said that we did not have reasonable assurance. The precedent was that the commission only actually required reasonable assurance on the original application, not on the subsequent applications. And I'm wondering how that might apply.
They've
with
changed
these
that.
windows.
If you amend, they're going to follow you to the ends of the earth to make sure that you've retained reasonable assurance. That was stated in the report and order.
Okay. I need to read the fine print better next time.
Yeah. And
Go ahead.
if we're an applicant looking to challenge someone else, that's the first thing we look for, by the way, is we check their reasonable assurance. So it's, yeah.
Here's a second scenario regarding the impacted areas that are impacted, overcrowded with frequencies, as it were, maybe from neighboring areas, but there's a small little piece available in your area only by second adjacent Raleigh type waiver. And I've been wondering, what are the possibilities of applying for an original application based on a Raleigh type waiver?
No, I've talked to Jim Bradshaw about this. Originally, you had to build the fully rule compliant facility, and then you could modify it later with a Raleigh waiver. Now they're actually letting you modify the permit, the original CP, but the original CP has to be fully rules compliant. Otherwise, as he's told me, it would just be too much gamesmanship here. But for those that don't know what they're talking about, you're allowed to, in many cases, you're allowed to accept second and third adjacent interference received from another station. And so your 60 dBu contour might actually encompass the transmitter side of another station that's second or third adjacent. And you're allowed to do that in certain limited circumstances if you can show that the increased population covered is very large compared to the theoretical number of people who might receive some interference, like 10-to-1 ratio or something. But you can do this before you build, but only after you get original CP.
Okay.
I
was thinking of the Antioch, Illinois situation where indeed the original CP was outside of the second adjacent 100 dB of the neighboring NCE, but then they modified to encompass the 100 dB of the NCE. And for others not sure what this is about, this is the second adjacent rules that apply to low power FM where waivers are routinely given. It's not the case with full power NCEs.
Yeah. But talking about that example, I mean, the Ames, Iowa, where there was a GRC a few years ago, is an example of, we use that strategy there. We got an original CP with a directional, which directionalized away from the city we wanted to cover, really, the real population. And then after we got the original CP, we modified it, went non-directional, and had a beautiful signal. So
just a piece of advice to everyone that if you're serious about applying for an NCE in the first window, and you're serious about it, line up your engineer and your attorney soon. In 2007, it got to the point where Michael was having to turn away any more business because he already had so many clients that it was no fair to the existing clients to take on more, and more than he could handle. So line up your engineer and your attorney.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be quite that busy this time, but yeah, that still applies.
Maybe not.
Good problem to have, right, Michael?
Yeah, well,
I don't know, 4 hours sleep a night. I was the one who was inputting the information into the applications, and man, that was a lot of work.
Well, this has been a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate that. brownbroadcastservices.com. Am I correct? If they want to learn more, we'll
Yeah.
do a few more questions here, but did I get it right?
it's brownbroadcast.com. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then also to let you all know, Michael Cousins has been piping in here. He's a broadcast attorney located in California, but working for radio stations across the country, representing a lot of nonprofits with the FCC and whatnot. So Michael, thank you for joining us from out there.
Pleasure. Yeah, glad to be here. Good job, Michael.
Thank you.
How can they, if they want to get in touch with you about legal services, Mike, how do they get in touch with you?
It's a really simple email, cuz@well.com, CUZ@WELL.com.
Okay, excellent. And while I have the floor, and then I'll let a few more people ask questions, but I just want to, some people may need to go because we're just over an hour and a half here or more.
Yeah.
But this has been great. I mean, super useful. I don't think anyone was bored at all. So thank you it's a lot of good information that we needed to have. But before people start checking out, please put January 11th on your calendar for the next meeting of the virtual GRC, 8 p.m. Eastern. And we don't know the topic yet. If you have a topic you'd like to discuss, let us know. And maybe it has something to do with the rolling out of the vaccines, not sure. But very exciting, and we'll be safely within a new year at that time, and we all expect everything will magically change in 2011. I mean, 2021. See,
2011. We'll go back 10 years. That's what.
Back to the future.
Let's go back.
I think the key word is things are going to change, but it's going to happen slowly, both in the pandemic and also getting things squared away at the FCC. It's going to be a slow process. There's just so much garbage to undo. And so
It's true.
I don't know if that's going to delay the windows, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
Well, Michael, while I have your attention, and then I'll let some other people ask any more questions they might have. My question was concerning the attributable interest. And let's say you have an LPFM right now. That's the only one you can have. You don't want to give that one up. But you would like to help some other stations and maybe other nonprofits get their stations on the air. How much can you be involved with another station? I know you cannot be on their board if you're on the board of one LPFM. Is it okay to advise them, to help them? Does the FCC, are they okay with that sort of thing?
You can be the general manager for both stations in the same building. It's been done, but you can't be on both boards. Yeah.
Okay, so it's really the board member thing that you have to look at.
Because they're the ones that have control.
Okay.
Agreed. Yep.
Great. Okay, thank you.
And there are some LPFMs that share programming and things like that. So, and other facilities.
Great. So you could find another nonprofit that you're friendly with, and you guys kind of work together, and that would be no problem as long as your board members are separate.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Who else has any more questions for Mike and Mike?
I got one more, and that is, I'm curious about the timing. It said something about you have to have been on air for 2 years. We've been on air for almost 4 in January, but we've only recently gotten our own nonprofit. So do they count? We were part of Arts Alliance the first 3 years. So
well, after 4 years of operation of the LPFM have passed, the LPFM can transfer it to any qualifying organization, whether they qualified for the same number of points or not.
Yeah, whether your legal status during that period was funky or not is not what they're looking at all in terms of the 4-year.
So the longevity.
4-year threshold.
Okay, I think I get that. Thank you.
But once again, was the original station awarded on points? That's a key thing here. If it was awarded as a singleton, then you don't have to wait.
It was a singleton.
Oh, then I don't think you have to wait.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah, they replaced a hard 3-year with a soft 4-year, basically. A conditional 4-year, I guess.
I have a comment on, let's say, choosing an attorney and an engineer. And that is, make sure you get someone you trust and someone who is aligned with the movement. And I've seen organizations get screwed for not doing that.
Particularly the attorney. Yeah.
Well, both actually.
Yeah.
I don't know who that was, but I will say that there are religious broadcasters in the field who have their own team. They have their own engineers who, on the whole, I think Mike would agree with me, are excellent. They have their own attorneys, and they can run over us like a tidal wave. So we just do the best we can.
Al, do you have any advice on finding, determining whether or not the attorney or the engineer is aligned with the movement?
Well, you have to talk to them. And I'm having said it in this forum, I will say that that the engineers and attorneys that have spoken up at this meeting here tonight are people who I trust and also believe they are aligned with the movement. And I think part of it is, are they do they make a point to show you that they are aligned with the movement? But I have seen a couple of cases where the organization either got screwed or very nearly got screwed. And one example is of how is, oh yes, I'll do your application, and then Thursday, and remember the application window closes Friday. Thursday they say, oh, I can't do it, and of course, or if you're trying to apply, you say, well, what are we going to do now? And that can result in a disastrous outcome. There is well, there's actually in a couple of those cases that I'm aware of, it turned out that the organization was able to find somebody else to do it on the last day and was actually successful. But it's pretty scary when the deadline is coming soon, and then your engineer that you lined up, you made arrangements with way in advance, says, I can't do it.
Well, what I would say is stay in touch with your consultants along the way. You
Absolutely.
Should, right. If you haven't heard from them in a couple of weeks, give them a call or poke them in some way.
Let me ask you, Mr. Brown, have you ever taken a case for somebody who that you then didn't bust a gut to get over the finish line instead of leaving them at the last minute?
we've always busted our gut and lost a lot of sleep at times, but
I have to admit that was a softball question, but
yeah, we can sleep later is what you said. That's the mantra.
Well, be careful, that's for sure.
But it's the best thing to do is with everything in life, of course, is including this PowerPoint. I got it done with about an hour to spare. So so the idea is, start early, because something always goes wrong. It always takes much longer than you expect, no matter what it is. Yeah. And it's more important now than it was before, because fewer things than ever are fixable after the fact. I think both Mike and I have both gotten in and done cleanup work for applications that were messed up by somebody else, and we sometimes usually manage to save them, but you can't save them so easily anymore. They've got to be pretty much letter perfect from the beginning now.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you all so much. I mean, tons of great information. And I think everyone knows how to get in touch with you all now if you have further questions. And I guess this will be an ongoing conversation. Sandra, do you have something?
Yeah, just one quick question. Do you have a sense, you're talking 2021, are you talking early 2021, or do we have any sense of when? The window for the full power?
We've had no recent indications. The current chairman, Pai, who has announced he's going to be retiring, was hinting as a window as early as, I think, July of this year. And then there was all sorts of a flurry of speculation as to whether we might actually have a window this year. So I and others questioned FCC staff, are we going to have an NCE window this year? And they all unanimously said, no, not this year, not this year, but it could be early next year. And that's the last I heard. That was before the election. And as I said, because there's going to be some turnover on the commission and maybe some different direction, I personally don't see it happening in the first quarter, but there's no guarantees of that.
the commission moved its headquarters to L Street Northeast, which is a kind of a short walk from the Union Station and the Library of Congress. If you want to take a stroll up there, no one can go into the building for the foreseeable future. They have offices assigned, but they're all working at home. So it's really hard to schedule things with a situation like that. They've moved and yet they haven't moved. I don't know whether their files, their belongings are in the building or what, but if their files are in the building, they can't go look things up because they can't go into the building.
Would you agree, Mike, that more than likely we're looking at the second half of next year, not first half?
Yeah.
Well, does anybody?
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, all of this is very helpful. Anybody else
It's
have any?
not that far away. There are things you want to be working on now. You want to be getting your funding together, your support, community support, and talk your board into it. That often the board can become a problem because it takes so long to actually get a station, and they lose interest. And so make sure you got a lot of stuff lined up starting now.
We're doing a lot of channel studies right now for several. And so, yeah, we can do a much more relaxed and thorough job for you if we can talk to you early. So.
Is that the first step, Michael, for someone who is interested in a full power potentially, is to find an engineer and see if something like that is available in their area?
Yeah, and actually, what we've been doing is, I used to always charge for frequency studies, but because if you're in an urban area, and it's highly unlikely you're going to have a channel at all, I've actually been doing free studies, doing all the 20 channels and thoroughly checking to see if there's anything without sending them a bill. If you want to see the maps, then that's another story. But it's because usually the answer is no. If you're outside of a big populated area, then there'll be a small fee for an initial channel study, and then we can go from there.
Okay, great. Well, this is exciting. I would love to see some of you all step up to full power. I would love to in Louisville, but I'm not sure what the chances are. Maybe talking to you soon, Michael. But Ellen, sounds like you have a great chance out there, so that's very exciting.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for all this information, and I'm going to go see my board at the soonest opportunity.
We're rooting for you. That's awesome. Well, you all, it's been a long time here, but if you guys have any final chats or whatever, I will leave you to it. Feel free to stay here in Zoom and talk radio things as long as you want. Again, January 11th, it's a Monday this time at 8 p.m. Eastern. So hope to see you there. And again, if you have any ideas for topics for next month, let me know.